Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Kaplan Schwazer's Demystifying Ethics Strategies for Success for CFA Level 1 Candidates. My name is Brian Stipe, and I'm a sales director at Kaplan, and I'll be the host for our event. Today, we'll be discussing ways to tackle the ethics section of the CFA exam. This is a glimpse of how Kaplan Schwazer study materials and our expert instructors can best prepare you for the CFA exam, one of the most valued exams in the world, but also one of the most difficult. We appreciate you taking the time to join us, and if you have any questions during the presentation, please use the question function on the GoToWebinar platform. We'll do our best to answer these as they come in, and if we have time at the end, I'll ask our main speaker from the list of outstanding questions. You can also email us directly at staff@kaplan.com or visit schwazer.com/CFA for more information on the CFA program. Before I introduce our speaker, a few items to note. We will be recording the session and we'll share the link with you in a few days. Second, as you can see on the screen, Jim, if you can just forward one slide. We have three main options to obtain a significant discount on any of our review packages or study options. We have relationships with hundreds of financial institutions, so please check with your internal administrator or reach out to us for information on how you can find eligible corporate discounts. If you are a student at a university, you can use your .edu email address, and that grants you a student discount as well. And finally, local CFA societies have discounts with us, and you can order our products directly through them. The QR code listed on the screen will take you directly to our main CFA Level 1 webpage. And moving to the next slide, upcoming webinars. So as you can see, September 25th is the next one, so a little over a month for that, which is kind of all levels, financial modeling. It's a new topic that we're partnering with someone on that one, so more information to come. And then the top tips to pass level 1, October 17th, which is timely right before the November exam. And then our last one of the year is a level 3 webinar on derivatives. If these are of interest, please feel free to register if you want to pass this off to some colleagues or friends for them to enjoy as well. And let us know if you have other topics that you'd like to hear. We are here to help you with the exam, and if there's a certain level or topic or something that you find interesting or challenging, we will do our best to help you through that as well. All right, next slide.
Did I jump one? Yep, I did. Sorry. There you go.
All right. So, you know, this just kind of outlines what's available to you. If you are studying for the next exam in November, we have a review workshop in person in New York City, October 11th to 13th, as you can see. It's a 3-day intensive class that really gets you prepared, you know, a couple weeks before sitting. So highly recommend that. We used to do a lot of those back before COVID. And we're starting to reintroduce these back into our learning environment. We're partnering with CFA Society of New York City for that event, and we will be doing these again in 2025 on a quarterly basis. Also, you know, mock exams are one of the best ways to prepare for the actual exam. And if you are studying a little bit further out, February, May of next year, you know, our full study packages, the Schwazer notes as well, are great options. Okay. All right, our speaker, Mr. Jim Marr. Jim has over 30 years of experience in the financial planning industry as both an educator and advisor. Before joining the Kaplan Schwazer CFA faculty in 2021, Jim was department chair and professor at the College for Financial Planning, a Kaplan company, and he oversaw the Department of Financial Planning and Investments. In addition, he worked as a content specialist with Kaplan Financial Education, primarily in the areas of investments and insurance planning, and co-authored courses in the CFP education and exam prep programs. Jim, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Brian, and thanks everybody for attending today. And as you can see, we're going to talk a little bit about the Code of Ethics and Professional Standards. And as we begin, it's funny when Brian says, you know, you've been joined the CFA team back in 2021. I cannot believe it's 3 years. Time just seems to fly. So let's take a look at the code and ethics and standards of professional conduct. You can get a lot of good points here for your CFA level 1 exam. So you're going to see about 15 to 20% of the exam is just on this topic. So out of 180 questions you're going to get on the level 1 exam, you're going to see somewhere between 27 and 36 questions just on ethics. You can get some real, like I said, real serious points here. Don't overlook this topic at all during your studies. Okay, so safe to say you're going to see, say, about 30 questions or so on the real exam. So make sure you invest the time and effort here. No shortcuts, as you're going to see, because this topic can really be the difference maker for candidates passing or failing level 1. And if I could even jump ahead, that would be applicable to levels 2 and 3 too. So you're going to get some real serious alpha. I'm sure that term is familiar with you in your studies when looking at ethics. So I always recommend investing your study time in this area, as you can imagine, as you can improve here. So some of the other topics might be real difficult, like fixed income and derivatives, but with ethics, you really can get good at it and pick up real valuable points for your CFA exam. And like I said, plus you're going to see it again in levels 2 and 3. Now, another important point as we begin, you need to know, and I'm going to put this pretty large up here, you need to know specifics. Now, you're not going to need to know the numbering system, as we're going to see coming up in just a little bit, but you're going to need a deep dive. You're going to need to know little nuances in the code and in the standards in order to get the questions right. So you want to stay deep diving again, no generalities. Like when I took the CFP exam, or some of you might be CFPs, you might be saying, hey, when we looked at ethics, it was pretty easy, right? Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. Well, that applies here as well, but it goes a lot deeper. So 2 things we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk real briefly about the code of ethics. Then we're going to look at the standards of professional conduct. And then lastly, we're going to look at 5 sample test questions to help you cross the finish line and get those valuable points looking at ethics. And as we go through this, I'm going to give you the 10,000-foot view too. Obviously, in our time together today, I can't totally deep dive into everything, but hey, we'll do what we can to hopefully even pick up a few extra points for you. So hey, if you got a pad and pencil, you might want to take even a couple of notes here as well. So first up, the code of ethics. There's nothing too difficult in this section as you prepare for your exam. It has 6 parts, and I'm going to go through each one of these pretty briefly here. First up is you simply want to act in an ethical manner. Now, this issue arises when defining what is in an ethical manner. As you will see, as we get through the code and into our standards today, we will get much finer definitions of these points. So really, our key takeaway, number 1, would be we want to act in an ethical manner. Now, number 2 is our integrity. And integrity is paramount, and the client's interest always comes first. You know, if I could put my first, say, big star on a slide here, it's going to be right there. Clients always come first. So when you're analyzing a test question or looking at an item set, when you, like I said, when you move on to the further levels, you've always got to keep that in mind. Am I acting in my client's best interest? And that comes over and over again throughout your practice, your mock exams, and the real test as well. So that gets a big star. Clients always come first. All right, next up, when you're acting in your role as an investment advisor, if you're a portfolio manager or you're an analyst, you have an ethical responsibility to exercise reasonable care and independent professional judgments. That would be our next big star. You got to use reasonable care and be independent. Now, also, when you're engaged in your professional activities, for example, you're making recommendations, you're expected to have reasonable care once again, and that would be, you want to really look at when you're investing the money as your own. What would you do here? And you will not have your judgment then tainted by some sort of outside conflicts of interest. And we're going to talk about conflicts of interest coming up in just a little bit. That's another really big point on the CFA level exams, is conflicts of interest. And then lastly here, we want to encourage others to act in an ethical manner. And we want to have that because it reflects credit on themselves and the profession. So once again, we want to be a credit to the investment profession. So our key takeaways, if we're looking at what should we be gleaming from the code of ethics at this point, is everything you see on italicized and bolded. That would be their big takeaways. So in here, if we're being a credit to the investment profession, we're encouraging others to act professionally, right? Everybody wins, and the investing public wins as well. All right, next up in our code is we do not want the investing public to lose faith in the capital markets, as they are essential part of the wealth creation process in our society, right? So if people lose faith in the capital markets, that could lead to really bad outcomes. So what do we want to do? We want to uphold capital market rules and regulations. And if you're in the States, you probably have heard of the SEC. So we want to abide by the rules. And lastly, we want to maintain and improve professional competence and strive to do the same for other investment professionals. And I could put another big star by that. We want to be competent. We need to know our limitations. So obviously, if we're having a client come in and they want to ask us about option strategies, and you're not really comfortable dealing with option strategies, what should you do? That would be a great test question, actually. It would be like sort of disengage with the client immediately or bring in another professional that's proficient in options to help. That would be a really good answer. So we want to know where our competency lies. We always want to improve our competencies. And I'm sure if you're on this webinar today, that's what you're doing, trying to improve your competencies. So we want to, once again, we want to maintain and improve our professional competence, but also have the opportunity to bring everyone else with us. So we're going to be competent, and we're going to help our friends and colleagues in the industry to be competent as well. So you can see that's our central theme here. Well, that gives us our really brief overview on the Code of Ethics. You could take, a little bit of a breath there, right? It's not a whole lot going on in the code. It's not really where the rubber meets the road, but you can think of the code as the umbrella covering the standards of professional conduct, which guess what? You're right. We're going to jump right into that. So there's a number of standards that we're going to look at. And like I said, I'm going to stay really high level here, give you a brief overview of each one and point out some of the ones I know you really need as you continue to study or begin your studies, where you really need to say deep dive, where you're going to see more common kinds of things tested. Now I put up here in the upper right hand corner the Standards of Practice Handbook. Now obviously working for the company, I have my Standards of Practice Handbooks. I'm going to hold that up for you. That is the 2014 edition. This one will be applicable for the November exam only. And then this one goes away. And going in 2025 and forward, you get a new one, the Standards of Practice Handbook. This is now the 12th edition, available on Amazon, pretty cheap, if you will. I would encourage you to get this and read it cover to cover. Now, I've also gone through the 11th edition versus the 12th. There's only a couple of really minor changes, and I'm going to address one of them today that I think you should be aware of, especially if you're studying for the 2025 exam. So we're going to take a look at our first standard here, and it's professionalism. And as professionals, we simply need to do these things, right? We need to have a knowledge of the law. And I actually have a really great sample test question coming up for you at the end of our session together about knowledge of the law. You got to know what the applicable laws and regulations are where you're doing business, and you're going to follow the most strict rules. So if you have a country that has no limitations or no regulations on insider information, but the Code of Ethics says you can't do that, and the standards say you cannot use insider information, you would follow the code. So you're going to follow the most strict. Then you have independence and objectivity. This is also a very big one here. It's maintaining your professional independence and objectivity is going to be a key part of being able to honor your fiduciary responsibility. So a number of you might already be acting in that capacity. So fiduciary responsibility. Obviously, you can't misrepresent. That's all about simply being honest. Misconduct. And misconduct, I put a little caveat next to that too. It's professional conduct. And if anything, here, another big takeaway, if you could put this in your mental Rolodex for exam, you're going to gain a point right here on your exam. If you can remember, it's misconduct when you're acting as a professional. Something that you're doing, even if it's outside, say, of work, but it could tie into your professional conduct that could make you get in trouble. So you really want to focus on things that you'll be doing as a professional here for misconduct. Not so much that you got in trouble for doing something by yelling at someone on a soccer field. or something, and we're told to go home. That you know, for acting like that, that's not misconduct as far as CFA is concerned. And then also competence. Well, I've already touched on this one already. Members and candidates must act and maintain the competence necessary to fulfill your professional responsibilities. So in other words, you've got to know what you're doing. You've got to keep up with new developments. And I want you to think here, continuing education. That'd be a good one there as well. All right, integrity of capital markets, pretty simple stuff here. I'm going to put the star by this. This will be something you need to be really familiar with, is material, non-public information. And you're going to need to be able to define what is material and what is non-public. And if I could tell you, I could do an entire webinar just on 2A, and I would encourage all of you to practice questions here. Read the materials in one of the books and then do practice questions. That's how you're going to nail this. And then market manipulation is pretty straightforward here. If you're manipulating the market, what are you doing? You're destroying the public faith in the capital markets, and that could result in negative societal impacts. You do not want to do that. And there are really two things here that will be my key takeaways that I would want to give you. Would be you're doing something to intentionally distort a price, or you're artificially inflating trading volume. So those are two big ones you'd want to know for your exam. All right, duties to clients. Now this could be considered the centerpiece of our 7 standards that we will review here. So you want to spend a little more time in your studies on duties to clients. So first up, where does your loyalty lie when you're looking at loyalty, prudence, and care? And your answer should be, and if you want to even put an answer in the chat window, feel free to do so. We're going to be participating a little bit together later. It is your client. I mentioned that prior, clients come first. So that gets a big one. If you're not meeting your ethical responsibilities to your clients, this may be the worst of all the ethical violations. So you want to really focus on clients first. Next up would be fair dealing. That simply states that you're dealing with all of your clients fairly, not just the big ones or your favorite ones. Nope, you need to deal with everyone on an equal basis. Suitability, that's a real good one. I could put a good star by that. I think those are pretty straightforward. You'll be able to figure out that you're not going to have a grandma who's 78 years old with limited net worth being investing in derivatives and swaps and futures and so on, especially if she's indicating she lives on a fixed income. So that would be, sort of an egregious example, but you get the point. It should be a little bit clear there. And this does show up over and over again. So you do need to focus on suitability. This basically states that any professional activity, whether it be a recommendation or an action, have we considered that this specific recommendation to add the security to that portfolio is suitable for that client, right? And it's given the client's goals and constraints. So there's going to be 2 pieces to that you're going to need to know for your exam. Next up is D, and there's 3 words here, FAC. It's fair, accurate, and complete. All of these belong together when you are doing performance presentation to your client. You cannot have 2 out of 3. You need all 3. And it simply states how we are communicating performance with our client, and you must make reasonable efforts that, once again, is fair, accurate, and complete. And lastly, preservation of confidentiality, and there is my keywords there. Just don't share your client's information with anybody who is not authorized to see it. You have privileged information, you need to keep it to yourself. Now, obviously, caveat would be sharing information with an assistant. That would be a great test question. But say, for example, you ran across a client and they had an estate planning issue. It's evident they really need a trust set up. They've got family-owned business. They've got some issues there, and you know an estate planning attorney. So after you're meeting with that client or potential client, you call the estate planning attorney and you say, hey, I've got this guy, he owns this business, and so on and so forth. You have now violated the standards. Now, how would you get around that? You would have to ask your client for permission to contact that attorney. So that would be a really good example. And all really, like I say, with preservation of confidentiality is dealing with other professionals. All right, Duties to employers. Well, we do have a duty of loyalty to our employer, but remember, clients come first. This is really the big one here. If I'm going to pick out one of these three, it's the additional compensation arrangements. And here, once again, that's all about practice, just like the material non-public information. How do you get good at identifying when you need to disclose additional compensation? It's all about practice. And what we're really looking at here is, by receiving this additional compensation, is it conflicting with my employer? That's the big issue there. You know, am I getting some sort of incentive that might bias me in one way or the other? You know, does it conflict with my firm? And then you got to ask yourself with your firm, what circumstances under which this might be permitted? And then you might be asking yourself, hey, Jim, something's missing. What are the disclosure requirements by my firm? So I think that's a really ripe one for test questions, additional compensation arrangements, and they're tricky. That's why I really can put an emphasis on practice. You know what I'm going to do too? Read the examples in here in the books. They're really good as well, plus our study material. And then responsibilities of supervisors. Well, this requires a very high standard of what would be considered a safe harbor, and supervisors need to be active to comply with this standard. So you just can't sort of sit around. You got to be an active supervisor. All right, moving on to our next standard, standard 5A is a really important one when we're talking about investment analysis, recommendations and actions. It's diligence and reasonable basis. So I really need you to focus on that. So when making recommendations, we need what? Diligence and a reasonable basis to do so. And then I can also say tie in a little bit of suitability there too. B, the key word here is all about disclosure, and it's really how are we communicating our investment analysis and our recommendations to our clients, and we do that through thorough disclosure, right? But that disclosure needs to be in, say, plain language. It can't be an industry jargon where your client can't understand any of it. So it needs to be plain language. It needs to be adequate as well. And then record retention, I really would hope this would be a test question. All you would have is something to do maybe with how long you need to keep your records, but it is paramount that you do keep records. So simply put, you need to retain the sources when you're performing your analysis. Basically, you need to be able to defend what you say, you know, defend your recommendations to your clients. So you need to keep records as well. But nothing too exciting here, as you can imagine. It's all about disclosure and diligence and reasonable basis. All right, this is another big one, and it's the conflicts of interest. And remember, I said there's going to be a change in 2025. So if you're taking the test in 2024, you do not need to be concerned with this first word here in letter A. But if you're taking your test in 2025 and beyond, avoid is a new word here. So we must avoid or disclose conflicts of interest. And avoiding them can sometimes be very difficult and also judgmental, right? We not always can avoid all of our conflicts of interest. But how would you once again understand this? You'd find examples in the Standard of Practice Handbook and our materials as well. So you must make full and fair disclosure of all matters. I'm going to repeat that. You must make full and fair disclosure of all matters that could reasonably be expected to impair your independence and objectivity. And how should those disclosures take place? Plain language. Once again, so you can see there's recurring themes among our standards here. Priorities of transactions. Hey, I put that again. You see that if you understand that clients always come first, I think you'll easily get a couple of points on the exam, because you see it keeps coming up and over and over again as we talk. So priority of transactions, the client comes first, then the employer, and then you. And we're going to see an example of that coming up in just a little bit too. And then when we're looking at referral fees here, it's pretty much when we're referring a client to another professional, are we getting a fee for that referral? And so I'm going to put some dollar signs here. Are we getting any sort of, say, compensation? It would be even a better way of explaining that rather than just say dollar amounts. And what are the specific disclosure requirements? Your firm may have some rules around that as well. But once again, there's that word, disclosure. You can never get questions wrong by disclosing things for your exam. All right, moving on to our last standard. Like I said, with brief overview, and then we're going to go into sample questions. So next up, we have responsibilities as a CFA Institute member or a CFA candidate. Now, you might agree that when we looked at the prior 6 standards, that would apply to everyone in the investment profession, right? You probably would agree with that statement, where this last statement here only applies to you as a candidate in the CFA Institute program. So first up is the conduct as participants in CFA Institute programs. That would be simply the way we reference the CFA institution and our participation in the program, and how we refer to the designation once you're a charter holder. And it's pretty straightforward. I'm going to give you a sample test question on that as well. Now, for the exam, here's the key. As we go, before we jump into some practice test questions, you need to have a working knowledge of each standard. Like I said, specifics. Okay? You do not, and if I can stress this, do not need to memorize the numbering system. So you're not going to have to pick out, say, standard 7A. You're not going to have to do that. You're going to have to know, did the candidate violate the standard as responsibilities as a CFA Institute or member or CFA candidate? That's how it's going to be phrased. So do not worry about memorizing the numerics. You might want to take a deep breath there. You do not need to know that. Now, you might need to know what standard they're referring to, obviously, and then say what subpart they're talking about, but not the specific numbers. So you need to have a working knowledge, and we're going to go through some test questions on that, some samples to show you that, and then also some specifics. Remember, you got to go here at a deep dive, unfortunately. All right, who's ready for sample test questions? I know I am. I love teaching this stuff, especially when we get to sample questions to test your knowledge. So feel free in the chat window. I can see it, and Brian probably can see it. He always can pop in and say, hey, Jim, they're answering this. Answer more frequently than the others, but I'll do my best to keep an eye on it as well. So let's go ahead and dive right into some sample questions today. Sample question 1. Hopefully you can read this. And I put up some longer questions because this is very typical of, say, a little case scenario that you would see, and you're going to have to pick out the real big pieces of this, of the test question, to say, hey, what do I really need to be focusing on here, and where are they going? So John Hill, our CFA, he's been working for Advisors Inc. for 8 years. That's straightforward stuff. He's about to start his own money management business. So there's our first key. He's going to go into his own business here, right? And he's given his 2-week notice of his resignation from his employer. A few days before his resignation takes effect, on his lunch hour, he takes out a loan from a bank on behalf of his new business and used the money to buy some new office equipment for his business. Since he engaged in these transactions while still an employee of Advisors, Hill violated standard 4A. Now, I did put the numbering thing in here, but you'll see in the answers it's pretty straightforward, by doing any one of these. So I'm going to give you all a second. Read over this again. I gave you some little tips here. He's about to start his own business, gives his notice on his lunch break, takes out a loan, and goes and buys some stuff for his new business. So you got to ask yourself first up, did he violate a standard? What would come to mind? He's going to know his own business for himself. You know, can he do these actions without violating the standard? That would be key, violating a standard. So that'd be your first way to ask yourself that question. So I'm going to give you just a second to look that up. Now, I know darn well if I go in that chat window and I decide to click something, I'm going to mess everything up. So I'm not going to do that. So, but feel free in the chat, throw a letter in there. I'd love to see what you guys think would be a good answer here. I know, against my better judgment, I'm going to come over here to this chat thing and mess it up. I see there's some questions here. I see also there's something about buying the book. Amazon's a good place to buy the book. That's where I bought my standards, both my books, actually, 11th and the 12th edition. All right. What do you think the answer here is? A, breaching his duty of loyalty to his current employer by preparing to go into competitive business. B, neither taking out the loan nor buying the equipment. Or C, preparing to undertake independent practice before giving notice to his current employer of his intent to resign. Pretty easy question. It is going to be B. So the standard of practice under this particular number here, it really states that a departing employee is quote unquote generally free to make arrangements. And that would be what I'd write in my notepad right there. Make arrangements or preparations to go into a competitive business before terminating the relationship with the employee's employer, provided that such preparations do not breach the duty of loyalty. Remember, he has a duty of loyalty to his employer. I touched on that just a little bit ago. But these actions don't breach that. So he can go ahead and do that. And he performed them on his own time, right? On his lunch break. So that's in my eyes, these are fantastic examples of little case scenarios, little stories that you would see. And about, the length is even good, where you're gonna have to decipher a few bits of information. All right, moving on to sample question 2. We got Greg here. He's a security analyst. He visits David, Chief Financial Officer of Edmunds Company in Dawson, reveals a great deal of non-material, even though I'm sort of giving it away a little bit, non-material financial data to Alan, and data that Dawson routinely reveals to all security analysts who visit him. So put a little check mark by that. Seems like we're okay so far, right? From this data and other industry information, Alan conjectures that Edmunds is likely to make a tender offer for another company in the industry, a fact that, if true, would be considered material to the value of the company. So Alan, blank, which one of these do you think is the correct answer here? Can he publish his conclusion? Or B, he must not disseminate the information, or C, should send a copy of the report to Dawson for verification. So take a second and figure this one out. Like I say, when you're going through this, it's looking for the keywords. Now, on the real exam too, there is a highlighter feature, which is pretty cool. So when you're taking the exam, you can just simply drag your mouse over there and you can highlight the keywords at the testing center right there on the screen in front of you. So I like that. That's a pretty cool little feature there. So I might highlight non-material, all security analysts, and so on. So let's see, what do we think the answer is here? If you decided A was the right answer, you would be correct. Now, what do you notice? I let out with the non-material information. So you don't have a violation here, even though, look, we try to throw a trick word in there in the material. So while the information that Alan received from Edmunds CEO may be non-public, we're also told that it's non-material. So you got to have both pieces, material and non-public. Because Alan has reached his investment conclusion through an analysis of public information together with items of non-material, non-public information. That sounds like the mosaic theory. He used bits of information to come to a conclusion. I'm going to put a big star by that guy. Knew that. So publishing this conclusion is not a violation. All right, moving on to sample question number 3. We got Janet here, CFA. She provides investment advice and other services to clients in several countries. I love this test question, TQ here. So you might want to have a piece of paper out. And when you go to the exam center too, you're either going to be given a whiteboard with a little marker, or you're going to be given some scratch paper, a couple pencils. So this would be really good for you too. I'd want to probably write this out on a scratch pad. So she resides in country A. So we know where she lives. So she lives in A. So I'm just going to put lives down here in A, whose security laws and regulations are less strict than the code and standards. So let's just do code and standards like that. Then what does she do? She conducts business in country B. So she lives in A, but she works in B. They have no security laws and regulations. That sounds like the Wild West. So let's put that up here for you. There's no rules. And then C, they have securities laws and regulations that are stricter than the code. So which of the following statements is correct? According to the CFA Institute Standards of Professional Conduct, she must adhere to the code and standards where? And I love this test question. So take a look at this. She lives in A, does business in B, and also does business in C. Fabulous test question. I'm going to give you a quick second to try to figure this one out. Now on the real exam, you're going to have about 90 seconds to be able to look over a question like this and come to a conclusion. That's what CFA Institute expects you to be able to do on average. I love this question. All righty, folks. It's going to be A. So she must adhere to the code and standards in A and B, but the law in C. So we're going to remember, what was our rule before? I'm going to change the color here. It is strictest. So look at this. She lives in A. A says the security laws and regulations are less strict than the code, so she must abide by the code. B, there isn't a darn thing going on in B, right? It's the Wild West, so the code and standards would be applicable there. And then C, it would be the law in C because it is stricter than the code and standards. So like I said, I really like that test question. So the answer is A. Sample question number 4, a little shorter one for you. Kate Wilson, she's an equity analyst and she enters 2 transactions for her personal account. Put a little quotes by that. She sells, so her first action is a sell, 500 shares of Tybin Inc., a stock on which her firm currently has a buy recommendation. I'm going to put a question mark there. Wilson buys 200 shares of Hayfield Corporation and the following day issues a research report on Hayfield with a buy recommendation. Has she violated the code? So put next day, she sends out her buy recommendation. I like this test question too. I like them all. I picked them all. So this should all be pretty good, I would hope. So what do you think the answer is here? Did she violate the standard? No. Are both of these actions violations or are only one of them? This is pretty straightforward. And the answer here is not going to be no. So eliminate that one. Now, you might believe here that it's going to be B. And part of the problem with the way I've set up this question in sort of, it's not tricky per se, but look at the order I gave you. I gave you no as A, B is both, and then C is only one. So if you didn't continue reading all the answer choices, you might say, yeah, I don't think she can do either one of those. But guess what? You'd be wrong because only one of these are a violation. And then you got to ask yourself, well, which one? Here we're talking about the priority of transactions is really what we're driving at. This requires what? Members and candidates to give clients an adequate opportunity to act on a recommendation before trading for accounts in which the member or candidate has a beneficial ownership interest. And that looks right here, right at the second thing she did. She bought the 200 shares before she issued the research report with a buy recommendation. There is our violation right there. Now, members and candidates may obviously trade for their own accounts as long as they do not disadvantage their clients or benefit personally from client trades or violate any regulations that apply. The standard does not prohibit members and candidates from entering personal transactions that are contrary to what their firms are recommending for their clients. So that's why this part is okay, as long as the transaction does not violate any of these criteria. So only one of these actions violate the code. And lastly, sample question number 5. We have Nicole and Randy. Congratulations, they've passed level 2 of the CFA exam. So they got 2 down, 1 to go. And they have registered. So that's a key word here for their level 3 exam. Zeller circulates a resume stating that she's a candidate for the CFA designation and has passed level 2 of the CFA program. Does that sound reasonable? She's a candidate and she's passed the exam. While Toffler circulates a resume stating that he's a CFA number 2. Which of the following statements is correct? Only Zeller has violated the code. Both of them have violated, or only Toffler has violated. And I really like this question as well. TQ, test question. This related to the last standard we talked about. So what do you think our answer is going to be here? It's pretty easy. These are my eyes. I've seen this a few times, right? It is going to be C. Only Toffler has violated the standards. Zeller was okay here. So the code and standards does permit an individual to state that he or she is a candidate for the designation. So we have that piece right here. As long as a person is, and this is the key, registered for the next exam. That would be something that really could be a tricky one, right? So you can see, I pointed out, they have registered for the next exam, and she can then state that she's a candidate for the CFA designation. She's say part of the program. She's also allowed to say that she has passed level 2. That's fine. Or even level 1, that would be okay. But there is no partial designation. So you can't say I'm a CFA level 1 or I'm a CFA level 2. You can't put that on your LinkedIn page. You can say that you're a candidate for the CFA designation as long as you are registered for the next exam. So if you're registered to take the exam for level 1 this November or next year, you could say that you are a candidate for the CFA designation, and that would be just fine. So C is our correct answer here. Now, as we wrap up our session today, we have one more little slide with a thank you on it. You can see these are really, really good sample questions. This is about the level of difficulty that I would say you would encounter. But you can see you've got to know things just more than generic or generalities. Like even this question here is really straightforward stuff. But if I just took out one little piece and I knocked out the registered thing, we have a problem here. You needed to know that specific little piece of information to get that question right. So that's where time and effort really comes into play. And that's the big key with ethics, demystifying ethics. It's all about preparation. It's all about studying. It's about reading, but very, 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 very important with a cherry on top. It's all about practice. It's doing hundreds of practice questions on ethics to pick up on these little nuances like that word registered. And why? Because here's your study tips. It's got to be a priority. It's simply a set of rules. You need to know the rules, and the questions become infinitely easier. The more you study, you're going to look at questions and go, oh yeah, they can't do that, or no, that's okay. It's going to just hopefully jump off the page to you or jump off the screen when you're taking your exam. And being that if you're here, I'm going to sit on your shoulder. I'll give you a hand, right, at the testing center. I'll be like, hey, remember what I told you? Clients come first. So hopefully you remember that when you're taking your exam. Ethics is simply a set of rules. Go through our examples. If you're enrolled in our program or you're considering that, we have plenty of examples in ethics as well as our Swayzer notes. Really good stuff. You also can look at the CFA applied examples in their curriculum. And there we go. Do all the ethics questions you can find. You want to do hundreds of these throughout your studies. And I really recommend when you're studying these here too is you want to dabble, say, in ethics throughout your studies, but really the last month or so and really leading up to your exam, even in the last week, you just plow in ethics. Grab this guy or this guy, and in your last week, spend time here. And if you pick up a couple points, that could really be the difference. Getting questions wrong is a good way to get them right. We want to learn from our mistakes and now be applicable to any of our topics that you're covering, whether it be fixed income or equity or financial statement analysis. But here, there's always a tripwire that oh, that's right, they didn't say registered, so I can't say I'm a candidate. So that's learning from your mistakes. Ethics questions are not too deep, but you've got to know the specifics, okay? So if you haven't learned the rules, the questions do become very difficult, all right? And once again, I said, hey, there's some alpha in ethics, not to be really confused with Jensen's alpha, but you can get some points here. The time and effort you put in here really can make the difference, okay? It's your chance to get ahead of the average candidate. And that's really what you need to focus on too, is you've got to be better than the average. And how do you do it? I get up on the mountaintop and scream repeatedly, ethics is the way to go. So I really think that your time and effort you put into this topic area, being it's about 1/6 of your total exam, really can go a long way for you on exam day. So thank you, and I'm going to give you my email address. It's jim.marr@kaplan.com. I would say, hey, if you got any questions about ethics, shoot me an email. That's the best thing to do. And say, throw some questions in the chat here. I can also be followed on LinkedIn. And of course, you can subscribe to Kaplan's Swazier's LinkedIn page. Once in a while, we'll do some little videos. I'll throw a couple-minute video out there with some tips on how to pass your level 1. But get in ethics, and you'll be thanking yourself and thanking me at the end. All right, Brian, that's all I got. Woo.
Jim, we did have a couple of questions.
Okay.
You might have touched on these, but if you could just spend a little more time.
Yeah,
One is the book that you're holding up. If you can just hold it up or specifically state what it is. There's so many of these standards and codes. This is the one that's changed.
This is the existing one. So this one's going to be applicable for November's exam. It's the 11th edition.
It's a standards of practice handbook. So the 12th edition is for 2025.
That would be the purple one.
Okay.
Now, you can also, this is part of your curriculum. So if you have already enrolled with CFAI, you don't get the hard or the soft cover book, but you do have access to this material. It's on your ecosystem with CFA Institute. You can find it. It's there. I like to have the book in my hand, Brian. I can grab my highlighter. I can write notes in it. I can take it to the coffee shop. I'm old-fashioned. As you can see, I have no hair. I'm the old, book highlighter guy. So yes, it's a Standards of Practice Handbook, $25 on Amazon.
Okay, great.
For some of you,
and then, you
go
provided your email address, which is great.
Yep.
If any of the attendees have general questions, you can use the staff@kaplan.com for more information. And then Jim, if they purchase a package from us, a study package, every candidate gets access to the community forum. So can you just spend a minute just talking about what that means? Sure. What does access kind of grant them? And what are some of the benefits of the community?
Okay, so when you buy, like Brian said, any one of our packages that come with the Kaplan Swazier community allows you to participate with a bunch of other candidates. You can post a question, whether it be on ethics or on any other subject matter, and you can share your insights with other candidates. And also importantly, you will have us. So we also participate in the candidate forum. So for example, if you typed in a question, hey, I don't understand this concept on ethics, you might get a response from one of your fellow candidates, or you might say Jim Marr or one of our other experts here at Kaplan Swazier might answer you. So that's a very unique and say feature of our program, that you have that one-on-one interaction with candidates, but also the team behind the material as well. We're there as well. Does that help? So I encourage play in the community. Great.
No, that makes sense. One other question, and this is more of like myth busting here. So, is it true that ethics is like a tiebreaker for people who are on the pass-fail line for CFA Institute?
You don't want to bomb ethics. I would say it carries so much weight, Brian. I mean, I've seen and heard from students over and over again where, you'll see their results, and you'll get a result when you pass level 1. You're going to see the pass line, you're going to see your line, and you're going to see how you did on each subject area. And if you can pull that ethics score up, I think it really does give you an opportunity to be better than the average candidate and give you a better chance for success. Even if fixed income isn't your cup of tea and you just don't do well on that, where you might score 50% on that, But if you are popping ethics at 70, 80, 90% of the questions, I think it's a game changer. I really do. I'm a firm believer in it.
Okay, that is helpful. All
You
right.
can get so much benefit from your study time with ethics. I mean, and it's scored the same way as an FSA question, financial statement analysis. So where do I want to spend my time? Learning about deferred tax? Yes, it's important. But if I know if I walk into the testing center, I'm going to nail this topic. I've got it. I mean, it's 1/6 of your test. It speaks for itself.
All right, this has been great. Thanks, Jim. All right, so that concludes today's event. Special thanks to Jim Marr and Jim Vonick, who's behind the scenes, and to all of our attendees as well. As a reminder, please visit schweizer.com/CFA for more information on the program and our review packages. On behalf of Kaplan Schweizer, we wish you the best of luck as you continue your journey with the CFA program. Have a great rest of your day. Goodbye.
Take care, everyone. So long.